Hi everyone! Happy fall! I am excited tonight to make pumpkin chili. It's actually not pumpkin chili, but that was the inspiration for the recipe. I'm using a Kobocha squash, which is a Japanese pumpkin tonight, and I'm going to tell you all about that. But I want to get started with some of the ingredients first so we can get this recipe going. So I've cut up some onion here. You could use yellow onion, but I just happen to have red onion in the house, so I am going to put this in, and I forgot to grab some olive oil. So I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil in my big Dutch oven or stock pot, whatever you want to use. At the bottom, I'll turn that on. And I'm going to put my onions in there and let them start to kind of caramelize slightly. All right. Next, I'm going to put in some garlic. I have it already cut up here, these individual garlic cloves, and I used this garlic press. Have you ever seen this? This is really fun. Take one clove of garlic, you don't have to peel it, put it right in there, and you press it, squeeze it, and it comes out. You can scrape it with this little tool, and the other end you can get the skin out from the inside and just put that in your compost if you have compost. So my first question to you is, have you ever used a garlic press? Or do you have another favorite tool, some kind of kitchen gadget that you love to use? Comment below the video and let me know what kitchen tools or gadgets are your favorite. I'm going to throw this garlic in with the onion. I used a lot of garlic, as you can see. This is almost a whole head of garlic. I love garlic, so. And I just want to give this a little stir so it can cook evenly. I'm going to turn that down to medium heat so I don't burn it. While these onions are cooking down a little bit, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some squash. So I have a variety of squash here that are kind of my favorite. Fall is such a fun time, and there's all kinds of cool different squash. Most people are familiar with butternut squash, and that's pretty standard. And pumpkin, you know, a lot of times people just get the canned pumpkin, which you can also use for any of these recipes, but fresh is better. And if you've heard of butternut, have you ever heard of buttercup squash? Isn't this a cool one? I actually picked this myself, and look at this baby. It is just cool. I just think it's so neat looking, and it's delicious inside. And then this is a spaghetti squash. And this is actually a zucchini. This is this very ripe zucchini from my garden. And this is a red Kobocha squash. You can also get green Kobocha squash. It looks very similar in shape and texture, but dark green on the outside. Inside, they're both a beautiful red, meaty kind of squash inside. And it's a great substitute for any recipe that calls for pumpkin. And it's actually, the other name for a Kobocha squash is a Japanese pumpkin. And you can use it in those recipes. It's a slightly different flavor. It's very sweet. It's really good. So if you were to cut this, you want to do it carefully. You're going to stand it on its side. You're going to make sure your knife is not going towards you. You want to go away from you. And you can see I've already cut this, but just to show you, you would start by getting a little bit in and kind of make little cuts all the way around like that. Then when you've gone all the way around, then you can go deeper and get it all the way in and break it open. Once it's open, look at the beautiful squash inside. I mean, it's bright orange. It's really sweet. I wish you could smell it. It smells delicious. In order to cook this, you scrape out all the seeds with a spoon. You can save those and actually plant them in your garden, or you could roast them just like you would pumpkin seeds and eat them. But once you get it down to just this part, you can leave the skin on. You'd put them face down on a pan. So you may need 2 pans because this is pretty big. One on each pan. Maybe you'll put a little bit of water so it doesn't burn, and bake it in the oven about 400 degrees, probably about an hour. And then you'll see that once it cools off enough to touch it, it'll be super soft in here, and you can peel the skin right off after it's baked. Now, because this recipe is going to take a little bit longer, I didn't want to do all that. I can't seem to fit it back together now, but I have some already cooked. So, let's go back to our onions here. These are starting to caramelize a little bit, getting soft and translucent. Gives the dish a lot of flavor. And I am going to use ground venison. You can use, if you're using wild meats, which I suggest if you're trying to eat clean, wild meats they don't have any chemicals in them. They're just generally healthier. They eat their natural diet. So yak, wild boar, venison, wild turkey. You could also certainly do a good quality beef, which is traditional for, I forgot to tell you what we were making. We're making chili. Traditionally people would use beef, but if you do that, I would use organic, grass-fed, make sure there's no hormones or antibiotics or anything, and then it's fed a natural diet. I am just going to get a spoon, and I'm going to start putting the meat in. So ground meat, it's about 1 pound of ground meat. I'm just going to put that in there, and I'm going to stir it around. I'm going to break it up a little bit so it cooks evenly. Alright, and we're going to let that keep cooking. We want to make sure that that meat is cooked all the way through before we add any of the liquid ingredients, because you want to brown that meat a little bit. But you can start adding some spices. So I've got a variety of spices already out here. Always want to use a good quality salt. This is Himalayan pink salt, and it's full of minerals. So most people think of salt, sodium chloride, but Himalayan pink salt has 84 different minerals in it. And you can see I don't always measure. For my cookbook, I will put some measurements in, but when I'm actually cooking, I don't always measure. This is going to be, that looks like a lot, but it's going to be a lot more in the pot. It'll be almost full when we're done. It's a good amount of that, which adds lots of minerals. We're going to put some fresh ground black pepper. I'm going to put some thyme. Coriander, I just love. Coriander has such a fresh smell, and you may know that this is the seed of the cilantro plant. So if you like cilantro, it tastes different, but it's the same plant. So there may be some similarities. I love them both, the seed and the leaf. I'm putting a good amount in there because I love it. You can adjust your seasonings, especially if it's not something you're used to eating. Maybe you can always add some more at the table if you like it. This is cumin, another ground seed spice. A good amount of that, which is great in chili. I don't know if I said that I was making pumpkin chili at the beginning, but if I didn't, that's what we're making. And this is something that is not actually Mexican, but they traditionally use chili powder in chili. This happens to be an Indian chili powder. I think it's pronounced Degi Mirch. It's a really good Indian chili powder. I got that in an Asian supermarket. So I'm gonna put a good amount of this in because this is what makes it chili. Chili powder. It's made from, as you may imagine, ground chili peppers. So it's going to make it spicy, but remember there's going to be a good amount of stew in here, chili in here when we're done. So I may even add more after I, have it cooked, and I'll taste it and see if it needs more, because we want to have a good amount of chili powder to make it taste like chili. Now, my mom traditionally made this English recipe called Bubble and Squeak as I was growing up, and that'll also be in my cookbook. And that is sort of like a non-spicy kind of chili with rice. So you can adjust things the way you like them. If you don't want it to be spicy at all, you don't have to make it spicy, but traditionally chili is spicy. And oh, I wish you could smell this. The chili powder gives it such a lovely scent. And then when we put the pumpkin in, the Japanese pumpkin, you are going to have this blending of sweet, salty, and spicy that's just out of this world. I love pumpkin. It just gives things such an interesting flavor. So there's all my seasonings in there, and you can see that the chili's starting to have a nice red color. Next thing I'm going to do is add some beans. Usually for chili, you may use different color beans. I think traditionally you would use black beans, maybe white beans, red kidney beans, but I like to use whatever I have in the house. You don't have to make a special chopping trip to make an interesting recipe. So I had black beans and garbanzo beans, so that's what I'm using. Any kind of beans taste good in chili. That's 2 cans. I use the canned beans to save time. You could certainly soak a bag of maybe mixed beans or whatever beans you like, and you'd want to soak them overnight and then cook them in a separate pot in water before making the chili, because they have to be cooked before you put them in the chili. Otherwise they'll be hard. They don't cook very well in a stew, especially that one that has all this other stuff in it. If you get like chunks of meat in there, you just want to break them up as you're stirring. So now we've got the beans. Next, the crowning ingredient is the squash. Now you could substitute pumpkin, you could substitute any kind of squash, you could put sweet potato. They all have different nutrient and flavor profiles, but they also all work well as substitutes for each other. You'll see the dark is when you cook it in the oven, it has it caramelizes. It makes this like syrup. Any kind of squash or sweet potatoes or pumpkin, when you cook them the way that I described in a pan in the oven, it starts to caramelize. So what I did after taking the skin off, just put it right back in that pan with the caramelized syrup that just came directly from the sugars in the squash, and that adds a little extra flavor to the recipe. Now I'm going to mix this in, and of course that adds a good amount of bulk. And I didn't really go over this. I'll do it while I'm stirring here. That squash, why do we want to eat more squash? It is just packed full of nutrients. Of course, each type of squash has slightly different nutrient profile, but in general, squash are full of fiber, antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients. They're low in calories, lower in carbs than potatoes or other more starchy vegetables. So you can use them as a substitute for sweet potatoes or other yellow, orange vegetables. And they're delicious and nutritious. So I recommend. Now it's too thick, so I'm going to do 2 things. I have a little bit of leftover salsa, and since that has a Mexican kind of flavor. I'm just going to put that in there. A little bit of tomato. Traditionally, chili is made with a tomato base. So instead of that squash, if you were just making a regular chili, you would be putting in a whole bunch of chopped tomatoes or a can of cooked tomatoes. Ours is mostly squash, but I'm adding a little bit of chili to it also. Salsa to it also. And because it's so thick, you sometimes would add water to your chili, but to add more nutrients, I'm using V8. Or you could use any kind of, I usually would buy an organic vegetable juice, but I just happen to have this in the cabinet. And it adds a little bit more of the tomato flavor. And of course there's lots of vegetables in this actually. So also lots of nutrients. And this is just to thin it because it's quite thick and you don't want your chili to be that thick. It gives it a nice sauce, as you can see, and adds a lot of flavor. I don't know if you've had V8 or vegetable juice, but it's not just tomato. Because of all the different vegetables, like celery and I forget what else. Let's see what else. What does it have? Tomato, carrot, celery, beets, parsley, lettuce, watercress, and spinach are all in there. So adds lots more nutrition to it. Of course, it's in a jar, in a bottle, so it's less nutritious than it would have been if you just picked those out of the garden and ate them. But nevertheless, I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of this because I want this to be thinner. Again, you can use water to thin it, but this will add a lot more flavor and nutrients to it. And it gives it a little bit more of the red color of the chili. And then you just want to let that simmer for a while. I'm going to put the lid on the pot and just let it cook down. And I'm going to garnish it. When it's done, I'll serve it with fresh cilantro on top. Just chop that up and put the leaves on top of your bowl of chili. You don't want to put it in and cook it. Cilantro loses its flavor and nutrition a lot when you cook it. So it's really better to add that fresh at the end. Sometimes I'll put it in after I turn the pot on. After I turn the pot off, I may stir it in without the fire going. But you could also just add it to your bowl. So I hope you love this recipe. It's a great fall way to use up some squash, pumpkins, or like I said, sweet potatoes, whatever orange vegetables you have. Enjoy. Happy fall.